This is the story of the most disturbing block party I've ever been to. I'm going to tell you everything that happened, and I swear, every word is true. If you ever get invited to a party like this, think twice. Because what started as a fun summer evening turned into something I still have nightmares about. It was the middle of July, one of those hot nights where even the air feels heavy. Our neighborhood had this yearly tradition. Everyone would bring food, drinks, and speakers out to the street. Kids would run around, music would blast, and people would dance and laugh until midnight. I always looked forward to it. It was the only time the entire street felt like a big family. That year, a new family had moved into the old Wexler house at the end of the block. No one had seen them much. The curtains were always drawn, and they didn't really talk to anyone. But surprisingly, they were the ones who organized the party that year. They left handmade invitations in everyone's mailbox, written in beautiful flowing handwriting. At the bottom of the invite it said, "A night to remember. You won't want to miss it." I was curious, honestly. I figured maybe they were just private people but wanted to break the ice. So around 6 p.m., I walked over with a tray of cookies and a cooler of soda. The street was already decorated with hanging lights and lanterns, much fancier than usual. The music was softer too, kind of old-fashioned, like something from the 1950s. Still, everyone was smiling, chatting, eating. Kids were playing tag and the grills were smoking. That's when I saw the new neighbors. There were 4 of them, a man, a woman, and 2 teenage twins. They were strange, too perfect looking. Their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes, and they blinked less than normal. The woman's dress looked like it came out of an old movie, and the man wore suspenders. Who wears suspenders in 2025? I introduced myself, and they were polite, but it felt off, like they were just pretending to be normal. The daughter, Lily, stared at me a little too long when I said my name. Her brother whispered something in her ear, and she giggled in this high-pitched, weird way. I laughed awkwardly and walked away. About an hour later, people started acting different. First, it was subtle. My friend Jamie was standing still near the snack table, just staring at a bowl of chips. Then I noticed Mr. Dalton, the old man, who lives across the street, walking in slow circles near the mailbox like he forgot what he was doing. Then the lights flickered, just once. But when they came back on, some people were gone. I looked around. A whole group of kids had vanished. I asked a few neighbors if they'd seen where the kids went, but everyone acted like I was imagining it. They just smiled and said, "Don't worry, everything's fine." I felt this chill run through me. That's when I realized the music had changed. It was still soft, but now there were strange whispers layered into the tune. You could barely hear them, but they were there, whispering names. My name. I tried to leave. I swear I did. But when I started walking toward my house, the path felt longer. I was walking and walking, but somehow never getting closer, like the street had stretched. And every house I passed looked just a little off. Windows in the wrong places, lights flickering in patterns, shadows that moved without people. I turned back and went to find Jamie. She was still at the snack table. I shook her, called her name, but her eyes just stared past me, like she was watching something no one else could see. Then she smiled. A slow, creepy smile that didn't match her face. And she whispered, "Don't fight it. It's better this way." That's when I heard it, screaming from behind the Wexler house. I ran, not thinking, just following the sound. I made it to the backyard, and what I saw there is burned into my brain. There was a circle drawn in chalk on the grass. Around it stood the new family. In the center were the missing kids, all standing still with wide, empty eyes. Floating above them was this thing. It looked like smoke, but it had shape, like a giant face, hollow eyes, teeth like broken glass. It was feeding on their thoughts, their memories. I could feel it trying to reach into me just by looking at it. And the family, they weren't human, not anymore. Their faces were shifting, stretching, melting and snapping back. Their eyes were glowing like hot coals. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It felt like gravity itself was pulling me toward the circle. Then Lily looked at me and said, "One more, and the ritual is complete." I screamed. I don't even remember how, but somehow I managed to turn and sprint. I didn't look back. I just kept running, through yards, over fences. The lights of the party behind me got smaller and dimmer. And then, suddenly, I was back, in my house. Everything was quiet. No music, no lights, no people. I looked at the clock. It was 10 p.m. Just 10. But it felt like I had been gone for hours. I ran outside, but the street was empty. No sign of the party, no decorations, no music, just silence. I knocked on Jamie's door, no answer. Same with Mr. Dalton. Every single house I tried was empty. The Wexler house, gone, like it was never there. Just an empty lot, overgrown with weeds. I tried to report it. I called the police, told them everything. They checked. There was no record of a block party, no missing persons reports. According to their records, Jamie moved out 6 months ago. Mr. Dalton died last year. The Wexler house? According to city records, it burned down in 1994. I know what I saw. I know what happened. And every July since that night, I get a letter in my mailbox. Same handwriting, same words. A night to remember. You won't want to miss it. I burn them every time, because I know if I ever go back, I won't come back. So if someone invites you to a block party and the house number doesn't exist on the map, don't go. If the music starts to whisper your name, run. And if the people smile too wide and blink too little, trust your gut. Some parties are never meant to end, and some hosts are never really human. This is the story of Emily, a young woman who moved into a quiet little neighborhood on the outskirts of town. She had always dreamed of living in a peaceful area, surrounded by trees, with a sense of calm she could never find in the bustling city. She was new to this place, and the neighbors seemed kind enough. Friendly waves, warm smiles. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It all started on the night of the neighborhood's annual block party. She had been hesitant to attend at first. Being new to the area, she wasn't sure how well she would fit in. But her neighbor, Mrs. Harper, who was always so kind and welcoming, had insisted she come. "It's a tradition, dear," she said, handing Emily a homemade pie she had just baked. "You'll have a good time, you'll see. We always do." Reluctantly, Emily agreed. She wanted to make a good impression. It was a warm evening, the kind where the sun lingers a little longer in the sky before dipping below the horizon. As she walked down her street, she noticed how different it felt compared to the other places she had lived. More personal, like a tight-knit community. The party was held right in the middle of the road, where a few tables were set up with food, and colorful lanterns hung from the trees. People chatted and laughed, their voices blending with the soft music drifting from the speakers. Emily was nervous, but as she stepped closer to the gathering, she was greeted by familiar faces. She smiled and joined them. She saw Mrs. Harper right away, standing by the grill, flipping burgers. She waved Emily over with a grin. "There you are. I knew you'd come. Let me introduce you to everyone." Emily felt herself relax as Mrs. Harper introduced her to the others. It felt like a nice neighborhood gathering, simple, friendly, a little warm, but something about the atmosphere didn't sit right with her. She couldn't put her finger on it. Everyone's smiles were just a little too wide, a little too perfect. Their laughter sounded forced. No one seemed to blink. "Try some of my pie," Mrs. Harper said with a knowing look, as though she was expecting Emily to be pleased. Emily smiled politely, cutting herself a piece. The taste was sweet, but something about it was off. Too sweet, too heavy. She didn't want to seem rude, so she ate a bite and forced a smile. As the night went on, Emily began to feel more and more uncomfortable. The streetlights flickered for a second, casting long, strange shadows across the road. It wasn't the kind of flicker that comes with a power surge. No, this was different, as though something invisible was causing the lights to blink in and out of existence. She turned her attention back to the crowd, noticing how everyone seemed to be standing a little too still. Their bodies were frozen in place, as if they were statues. The laughter had stopped. The music had stopped. Yet no one seemed concerned. Emily's heart began to race. She tried to ignore the growing sense of dread creeping over her. She turned to Mrs. Harper, who had returned to flipping the burgers, her smile never faltering. "Is everything okay?" Emily asked, her voice shaky. "Oh, everything's just fine, dear," Mrs. Harper said without looking up. "Just enjoying the evening." But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The air around her seemed to grow colder, and the lights flickered again. This time, they didn't come back on. The whole street was submerged in darkness, save for the pale light of the moon. That's when she heard it. A low, guttural sound coming from the distance, an eerie, moaning noise that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. It wasn't the sound of a person. It was something unnatural. Her eyes darted around the darkened street. The people frozen in place had not moved an inch. No one had reacted to the noise. It was as if they didn't even hear it. Then, a figure appeared from the shadows. At first, Emily thought it was one of the neighbors, but as the figure stepped closer, she realized it wasn't human. The thing was tall, towering over her, and its skin was a sickly grayish color, slick and wet, like it had been underwater for too long. Its face was a twisted, grotesque mask, its eyes wide and vacant, with no expression at all. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, but no sound came out. Emily froze in terror. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, toward the center of the street. Its movements were jerky, unnatural. And then, just like that, it vanished into the crowd of people, melting into the shadows as though it were never there. But nothing about this was normal. The people standing around her didn't flinch. They didn't blink. Their eyes were wide open, fixed in place, staring ahead with blank expressions. The sound of the night had returned, but it wasn't right. It was a constant, hollow hum, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Emily felt the urge to run, but her feet wouldn't move. She looked at the crowd again. No one spoke. No one moved. They just stood there, as if they were waiting for something. Suddenly, Mrs. Harper appeared at her side. Her smile still stretched across her face, but it wasn't a friendly smile anymore. It was cold, knowing. "It's time, dear," she whispered. "Time for what?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Mrs. Harper didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back into the crowd, and Emily watched, in horror as the figure from the shadows reappeared, now standing in the center of the street. It was holding something long and twisted, like a cane made of bone. Without warning, the figure lifted the cane and pointed it directly at Emily. She felt a sudden, intense pressure, like something was squeezing her chest, preventing her from breathing. The world around her seemed to tilt, and the crowd of motionless people began to close in around her. It felt like they were suffocating her, like the very air was being sucked away. Emily's vision blurred. The shadows seemed to stretch and swallow her whole. And then she heard the whisper. It was so faint, so quiet, she almost didn't catch it. But it was there. You're one of us now. The moment the words were spoken, Emily felt herself falling backward into the darkness. The crowd's eyes locked onto hers, their faces twisted in unnatural smiles, their eyes empty. The last thing she saw before everything went black was Mrs. Harper, still standing by the grill, her smile wide and knowing. When Emily woke up, she was back in her home, in her bed, the sunlight streaming through the window. But everything was different. Her phone lay next to her on the nightstand, and a text message from her mother was open on the screen. "Honey, are you okay? We haven't heard from you in days. Where are you?" Her heart stopped. Days? How could it be days? She hadn't even realized time had passed. She looked around the room, but everything felt off, out of place, as if the world had shifted, and she hadn't noticed. Then it hit her. The memory of the block party. The figure in the darkness. The cold, hollow whisper. She wasn't sure if it had been real or just a nightmare, but deep down, she knew that it hadn't been just a dream. She remembered those words. You're one of us now, and she knew she would never leave. This is the story of James, a young man who had always been drawn to the unknown. He loved mysteries, especially the ones that took place in small, forgotten towns where no one seemed to notice what was happening just beneath the surface. One evening, while scrolling through an online forum about unsolved mysteries, James came across something that caught his eye, a post about a small town called Millfield. It was just a dot on the map, hardly known to anyone, but the post claimed strange things had been happening there for years. Curiosity got the better of him. James, ever the adventurer, decided to take a trip there. He figured it would make for a good story for his blog, a small town with a secret. So, he packed his things, rented a car, and set off for Millfield. It was late when he arrived, the town barely visible in the dim glow of the streetlights. The houses were old, some of them dilapidated, with faded paint and overgrown yards. It felt like something out of an old movie, the kind of place where time had stopped moving a long time ago. James drove through the empty streets, his headlights casting long shadows on the sidewalks. The town was quiet, too quiet. Not a single car was on the road, and not a sound could be heard except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. He pulled up to a small inn, the only sign of life in the town. The Millfield Inn sign hung crookedly, barely illuminated by the single bulb above the door. He stepped out of the car and walked inside. The air smelled musty, like old wood and dust. Behind the counter stood an elderly man, his face hidden behind thick glasses. His name was Mr. Jennings, and when he saw James, he gave a small smile. "Checking in, are you?" Mr. Jennings asked, his voice gravelly. James nodded. "Just for the night. I'm passing through." The man handed him a key. "Room 3, You can take your time here. The town doesn't see many visitors these days." James took the key, thanking Mr. Jennings, and made his way up to the room. The inn was older than it looked from the outside, the floors creaking under his feet as he walked down the hallway. When he opened the door to his room, he was greeted by the musty smell of the place, the kind that comes with old carpets and long-forgotten furniture. But it had a charm to it, like it had stories to tell. He dropped his bag on the bed and stretched. After a long drive, he was ready to get some sleep. But before he did, he decided to step outside and take a walk around town, just to get a feel for the place. The streets were even quieter now, the sky completely dark except for the occasional flash of a star. As he walked down the main street, he passed by a few houses, their windows dark and lifeless. There was something about the way the buildings seemed to stare at him that made him uneasy. It was as if the town itself was watching him, waiting. He continued walking until he reached a small park at the edge of town. There was a bench under a large oak tree, and James sat down, letting the silence surround him. The wind picked up and he shivered slightly. Something about this place felt wrong. Maybe it was the silence, or maybe it was the way the town seemed, so empty, like no one ever really lived here. As he sat there lost in thought, he heard a noise, a soft whisper like the wind speaking. He looked around but saw nothing. The air felt heavy, as if the town was holding its breath. James shook his head, brushing off the feeling of unease. It was just the wind, he told himself, but deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. He stood up and made his way back to the inn, his steps quickening as he approached the door. When he entered, Mr. Jennings was still behind the counter, staring at him with those old, tired eyes. "Everything all right?" Mr. Jennings asked, his voice soft. James nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. "Yeah, just a little tired." Mr. Jennings gave a slight nod. "Sleep well then. The town has its own rhythm. You'll get used to it." James mumbled a thank you and headed up to his room. But sleep didn't come easily. The bed creaked beneath him as he tossed and turned, his mind racing with questions about the town. Why was it so quiet? Why did it feel like everyone was hiding something? Finally, he drifted off to sleep, but it wasn't the peaceful rest he was hoping for. Instead, his dreams were filled with strange, haunting images. He saw the town, but it wasn't like the one he had just visited. The streets were crowded with people, their faces blank and expressionless. They moved in unison, as though they were all controlled by some unseen force. And in the middle of the street stood a figure, a woman, her face obscured by a veil. She was the only one who seemed different, the only one who wasn't part of the strange procession. James tried to call out to her, but no words came. He reached out, but she was always just out of his grasp. And then, as if in response to his desperate reach, the woman turned toward him. Her eyes, dark and hollow, seemed to pierce into his very soul. He woke up with a start, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was still dark, the only sound the faint hum of the old ceiling fan above. He sat up, his mind still spinning from the nightmare. He had to know what was going on in this town. The next morning, James decided to talk to Mr. Jennings. The elderly man was behind the counter again, his face as unreadable as the day before. James asked him about the town, about the people, about the strange feeling he couldn't shake. Mr. Jennings paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing as if weighing the decision to speak. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "This town has a history, son," he said. "A long one, a dark one. The people here, they're not like you." They're not like anyone else. James felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? Mr. Jennings leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Millfield was built on an old curse, you see. A curse that the people here have lived with for generations. And if you're not careful, it'll get you too. James felt a wave of unease wash over him, but he couldn't pull himself away. What happens to people here? They change, Mr. Jennings said, his voice barely audible. They become part of the town, like everyone else. And once you're in, there's no way out. The words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. James didn't know what to make of it. He didn't want to believe it, but something about the way Mr. Jennings spoke, the fear in his eyes, it all felt too real. James left the inn, his mind racing. He couldn't just leave without knowing the truth. He had to find out what was really going on in Millfield. But as he walked down the street, the faces of the people seemed to follow him, their eyes cold and lifeless. And that's when he saw her again, the woman from his dream. She was standing in the distance, her veil fluttering in the wind. This time, there were no dreamlike barriers between them. She was real, and she was waiting for him. James had no choice but to follow. This is the story of Michael, a young man who had always loved exploring the outdoors. For as long as he could remember, he'd spent his summers hiking, camping, and discovering places that most people would never even consider visiting. But this summer was different. His friends had been planning a camping trip to a secluded spot deep in the woods, and Michael, though cautious, decided to join them. They were all eager to get away from the distractions of their everyday lives and reconnect with nature, or so they thought. It was a Friday afternoon when Michael and his friends, Daniel, Sarah, and Emma, packed up their gear and set off. The drive to the campsite was long, the road narrowing until it became little more than a dirt trail. As they reached the outskirts of the woods, the sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow over the trees. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth. They parked their cars near a small clearing, the last sign of civilization for miles. There was something eerie about the place, a quietness that seemed to settle over them the moment they stepped out of the vehicle. The rustling of leaves was the only sound, and even the birds seemed to have stopped chirping. "All right, let's set up camp," Daniel said, trying to shake off the strange feeling. "We'll be fine. Just a weekend getaway." Michael nodded, but something in the back of his mind told him this trip wasn't going to be as easy as they thought. As they began setting up their tents, the shadows grew longer, and the forest around them seemed to come alive with strange noises. The wind howled through the trees, sending a chill down Michael's spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, but he pushed it aside, blaming the unsettling thoughts on the long drive. Once the tents were up and the campfire crackling, they sat down to eat. The warmth of the fire was comforting, and for a while, everything felt normal again. They laughed, shared stories, and joked about their city lives. But as the night wore on, the forest seemed to grow darker, and the unease returned. "I'm going to take a walk," Sarah said, standing up from her spot by the fire. "I'll be back in a few minutes." "No, Sarah, don't go," Emma said quickly. "It's getting dark. It's not safe." But Sarah, ever the adventurous one, just smiled and waved. "I'll be fine. I won't go far." Michael watched as she disappeared into the woods, her figure swallowed by the darkness. A few minutes passed and then more. The others tried to keep the conversation going, but Michael couldn't focus. He kept glancing toward the trees, waiting for Sarah to return. "She's taking longer than expected," Daniel remarked, but his tone lacked the concern it should have had. 30 minutes passed before Michael couldn't stand it any longer. "I'm going after her." "Michael, it's fine," Emma said, a note of fear in her voice. "She's probably just lost track of time. Don't go." But Michael was already on his feet. "I'll be quick." He grabbed his flashlight and ventured into the woods, the beam of light cutting through the thick darkness. The air was colder here, and the trees seemed to close in around him. The further he walked, the quieter it became. Even the wind had died down. He called Sarah's name softly at first, then louder as he moved deeper into the forest. The only reply was the rustling of leaves underfoot. Panic began to build in his chest, and he quickened his pace. Where was she? After what felt like an eternity, Michael reached a small clearing. There, in the middle of the space, was Sarah's backpack, discarded carelessly on the ground. His heart skipped a beat as he knelt down to check it. There was no sign of Sarah. "Sarah!" Michael shouted, his voice desperate. But still, no answer came. He turned to leave the clearing, but something caught his eye. On the far side, near the edge of the trees, he saw something. A figure standing motionless, watching him. The shape was tall, unnaturally tall, and its limbs seemed too long for its body. Michael froze, his breath catching in his throat. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The figure tilted its head slowly, as if studying him. Michael's flashlight flickered, casting strange shadows on the figure's face, which was obscured by a long, dark hood. Its eyes, if they were eyes, were just black voids. The darkness around it seemed to throb, like the space itself was alive. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, but before he could take a step back, the figure began to move. It didn't walk like a person. It glided, its feet barely touching the ground. Michael's heart raced as he took a step back, then another. But the figure was closing in, its movement swift and unnatural. His instincts kicked in and he turned, running back the way he had come. The trees seemed to press in on him, branches reaching out like twisted fingers. His flashlight bounced wildly in his hand as he sprinted through the woods, the sound of footsteps, too many footsteps, echoing behind him. Suddenly, he tripped, falling hard onto the forest floor. The flashlight flew from his hand and rolled away, its light flickering out. Darkness surrounded him, and he scrambled to his feet, trying to find the light. But just as he reached for the flashlight, a cold hand gripped his shoulder. Michael spun around, but no one was there. His breath came in ragged gasps, his mind spinning with fear. Something was out there, something he couldn't explain. He could hear it breathing now, low and raspy, just behind him. He reached out and his hand brushed against something cold and smooth. Stone. He glanced up and saw the entrance to a cave hidden in the trees. Without thinking, he darted inside, hoping it would offer some kind of shelter. Inside, the air was damp and smelled of earth. He took a few steps forward, trying to catch his breath. But something wasn't right. The walls of the cave were covered in strange markings, symbols he couldn't understand. They were old, worn by time, but still clear enough to send a chill down his spine. He backed away from the walls, feeling the oppressive weight of the darkness pressing in around him, and then he heard it again. The breathing. But this time, it was louder, closer. Something was in the cave with him. He turned, his eyes straining in the dark, and there in the shadows he saw the figure again. It was watching him, just beyond the reach of his vision. Its black eyes gleamed in the dark, and Michael knew then that there was no escape. Suddenly, the air around him grew cold, too cold, and a voice deep and gravelly whispered from the darkness, "You shouldn't have come here." Michael didn't wait to hear more. He ran deeper into the cave, the sound of his feet echoing off the walls, but no matter how fast he ran, the feeling of being followed never stopped. The last thing he remembered, before everything went black, was the sound of whispers, thousands of them coming from the walls, from the ground, from the very air itself. And then, there was nothing.